Well, welcome everyone to the Mary Baker Eddy Library and to our program this evening, Archival Access Online, the promise, the problems, the payoff. I'm Jonathan Eder, programs producer here at the Mary Baker Eddy Library, and I'm very anxious to join you out in the audience to learn from this moderator and panel about what's out there and what's to come in the world of searchable online collections and archives. I know that many of you out there are in the profession or are preparing to enter into the profession or are users of archives, and so you understand the beauty, the power, the value of the primary source. For me here at the Mary Baker Eddy Library as programs producer, I also really have come to cherish archives so much. Now, for us here at the Mary Baker Eddy Library, to paraphrase the book of Genesis, in the beginning was the archive. And everything, exhibits, programs, etc., have flowed from it. And indeed, for those of you who love research, it really can be a heaven to make discoveries in an archive. And for those of you who work in archives, it's a tilling, cultivating, preserving that space is really a kind of holy work in many cases, I think, perhaps in all cases. So it's something really to be honored. Please join me in welcoming Beth Louie, our moderator. Beth, as some of you may know, has had a very distinguished career working with archives as a documentary editor of documentary projects, and her book, Handbook for Academic Authors, is in its 5th edition. So that may live on some of your shelves, I'm not sure. But anyway, join me in welcoming Beth Louie, who will introduce tonight's program and our panel.
Thank you. Well, welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful evening. Our discussion today will begin where every editor and archivist begins, with the documents. When we make decisions about what to digitize and how to present it, we look first at the nature of the documents in our collections. But we quickly move on to other questions that arise from that one. Who will be interested in the documents? What will they expect from them? How can we best engage our audience? And once we've envisioned our audience and their expectations, we move on to more practical matters. How much time do we have? How much money? What skills do we need to develop, or what skilled people do we need to hire? What technology should we use? Which collections should be given priority? And even when we have created our digital archive, we need to figure out how to maintain it, update it, and improve it. Every time someone uses one of our digital collections, we have the opportunity not only to educate, but to learn. We need to see our users as a resource. All of this work is worthwhile because digital archives have enormous promise, as the title of our evening suggests. They allow us to disseminate our holdings while protecting and preserving them. They allow us to improve scholarship and understanding, to democratize knowledge, to engage people in the humanities, and increase appreciation of our collections and subjects. With that in mind, our panelists will present some of the digital work they have created and talk about what questions they asked as they developed the project, the issues of genre, audience, resources, and goal. They'll also talk about how they hope their projects will benefit their various audiences and promote the missions of their institutions. We have deliberately left time at the end of our presentations for you all to ask questions, so please feel free to do that. There's a microphone in the center, and we very much hope that you will give us the opportunity to talk about more than we do in our brief 15 minutes each. Let me introduce our panelists. Neil Mann, to my right, has experience of several aspects of digital humanities. His doctoral dissertation was on the Irish poet W.B. Yeats, and he created a website based on this work in 2002. He He was involved with the National Library of Ireland's exhibition on Yeats, which opened in 2006 and exists now as a virtual exhibition on the web. More recently, he has worked at the New York Public Library on part of a project funded by the Polanski Foundation, in which the Berg Collection of English and American Literature is digitizing its holdings of 6 major 19th century American writers: Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Sophia Peabody Hawthorne, Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, and Samuel Clemens, or Mark Twain. They did manage to get out of Concord a little bit, but not a whole lot. Nancy Haywood, to Neil's right, has been the digital projects coordinator for the Massachusetts Historical Society since 2001. She has coordinated the production, development, and delivery of digital presentations of thousands of manuscript pages and hundreds of selected items, including photographs, daguerreotypes, broadsides, pamphlets, art, and artifacts from the MHS collections. Previously, she was a project archivist at the MIT Institute of Archives and Special Collections. Nancy has also participated in Digital Commonwealth for many years as a member of the executive committee and president. Digital Commonwealth is a statewide collaborative effort in Massachusetts promoting the production and discovery of digital content featuring materials from cultural institutions in the state. And to my far right, Dr. Sherry Darling is Special Projects Manager here at the Mary Baker Eddy Library. She attended the Summer Institute on Editing Historical Documents in 2011 and spoke about her current project at the 2014 National Meeting of the Association for Documentary Editing. She serves as the lead researcher and editor of the Mary Baker Eddy Papers, the library's first effort to annotate and publish a selection of Eddy's letters and manuscripts online. She also manages the library's fellowship program for scholars conducting primary research in Eddy's papers and records documenting the history of the First Church of Christ scientist. So I'm going to turn to Neil to get us started.
Good evening. We have titled this Archival Access Online, The Promise, the Problems, the Payoff. To underline the huge promise, obviously we are all enthused immensely by the whole dimension that the online availability of these documents and archives gives us. You can now access whenever, wherever you want, a whole range of documents. I mean, just here on the screen, you've got a letter from Melville, a poem by Emerson, a letter from Emerson about Margaret Fuller's shipwreck, and a check for Nathaniel Hawthorne for a book advance. These are some of them important, some of them trivial. They're all wonderful. They all enthuse us. They engage us with these historical people. We can now print these out. We can download them, save them, do all these things. This is something absolutely wonderful. And, I can now, for instance, here and now in this room, I can look at a diary entry for over 100 years ago by Nathaniel Hawthorne for September the 23rd, 1859. Slightly overcast morning, wrote till 3. Wonderful writer, wonderful author. After dinner, took a walk on the beach with Una. And that's it. Even Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote boring diaries. But it's not just my location. It's also the location of the manuscripts. A wonderful example of this is the oldest complete New Testament, which is the Codex Sinaiticus, which exists now in 4 different places. The main part is in London, another part is in St. Petersburg, another part is on Mount Sinai, its original place, and another part in Leipzig. Virtually and online, we can unite that volume. We can now look at that book as one book again, something that hasn't been possible, so that the internet is making possible something that wasn't possible until just now. Something that is involving the Berg collection at the New York Public Library, the institution that I'm involved with, is the John Donne Papers. Now, one of the volumes of manuscripts is the Westmoreland manuscript, held at the New York Public Library. But if you want to see the other ones, you've got to go to St. Paul's Cathedral in London. You've got to go to the O'Flaherty manuscript is here at Harvard. Another one is in Oxford, and another one is in Dublin. You know, you're racking up air miles, whereas here now, you can actually sit down, go to this website, run, incidentally, by the university, by Texas A&M. So again, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the institutions that hold the manuscripts. All you need is somebody who has the initiative and the desire to ask them, give me copies of these manuscripts. I will pay for them to be photographed, or, you know, have you got photographs that I can use? But as long as you've got somebody who's got the initiative, and it doesn't matter where they are, they can then do this. A similar one, this is a different one. Again, a manuscript held at the Berg Collection, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. This manuscript is so fragile that if you go to the Berg Collection, you cannot look at it. You look at photographs. If you find something that you really cannot see in the photograph, the librarian will bring the book out, open it at the page, and allow you to look at that page, but nothing more. However, online now, you can go and look at this thing. You are helping to preserve the manuscript by looking at it like this, but you're also able to engage with the manuscript directly in a way that you can't do really as well in the poorly lit areas of the Berg Collection, because this place is cold enough to be good for books and badly lit enough that the books will not fade. It's not designed for human beings. Similarly, and a story that I came across in the files the other day was Louise Deeming sold some of Sophia Hawthorne's correspondence to the Berg Collection back in the 70s. And she was lobbying very vigorously with the librarian, with the curator of the time, to give access to somebody who was doing an edition of these letters and asking, please, please, please let him have photocopies of these letters, because he's losing so much time having to come to New York to transcribe them. And if you've ever tried to transcribe something, you might be able to transcribe 99% of it, but there's always those little things that you just cannot get, and you need to keep on coming back. Eventually, yes, he did get those photocopies. The book still hasn't been produced, sadly, but now everybody can look at those things, and even better copies, even better things that you can blow up, you can rotate them, you can do all these kinds of things. It is a far more democratic and general access than it was, you know, even 30, 40 years ago. And then, talking about undecipherable manuscripts, here I just had to put it in because it's so beautiful. This is the Voynich manuscript, famously indecipherable and famously undeciphered still. But you have these beautiful pages of plants and so on. And this reminds us that a lot of these books are just wonderful objects. We want to see them. And again, one of the sort of primary initiatives for most libraries has been to photograph and to show beautiful books. So in that sense, a lot of medieval manuscripts have been done, a lot of important books. But another thing that has been made possible online is to bring the apparatus all into one place, so that the apparatus is there. So for instance, here we have the Coda Sinaiticus. We also have a transcription. We also have a translation. With the John Donne, we have a translation, a transcription alongside, so that you can look at the original, but you've also got some help to help you read it. Here, with the Virginia Woolf, you hover the mouse over it, and you get the line that you are hovering over appears magically on the page. So you can go down the page, and it appears little by little. Again, Walt Whitman's manuscripts are scattered here, there, and everywhere. Institutions are willing, generally, to give access to these. People, if you ask for these, then the institutions will give access. So a project at Lincoln, Nebraska, started with this. And so now, for instance, you can get access to archives that are in Virginia, the Library of Congress, here at Boston Library, and also the Berg Collection. Here is, for instance, a death sonnet for Custer, which is one of them. And this is just another final sort of example of the transcription thing. This is a hovering lens, where you can see this lens that hovers over, magnifying, and then you press the button in the bottom left-hand corner that says transcription, and it transcribes it for you. Now, somebody has to obviously program that all in. This should be available online. It should have been made available, but because of technological problems and because of cost, and this is the big thing, it wasn't possible. Similarly, here we have the Nietzsche project. The Nietzsche source online is one of the best projects online. But there is a commercial thing that has ridden piggyback on this and provides an even better service. But if your library wants that, it will have to pay $50,000. That's just for Nietzsche. If you want to add in Berkeley or Hume or something, you're going to have to, more money for that. So, how am I doing?
You're fine.
Okay. The Berg collection has a huge range of literature. It has a huge range of manuscripts. This is just a sort of a montage wall. How do we try to decide what we're going to digitize? How do we decide what we're going to make available? Well, one good way of doing it is to have somebody offer money to do something and say, I will pay for American literature. So this basically helps to concentrate the mind. Leonard Polonsky has also been, he's also built a Shakespeare theater in Brooklyn, and he's also been paying the Vatican Library and the Bodleian Library to digitize Greek manuscripts, Hebrew manuscripts, and early printed books. So he's got this sort of, degree, he's got a group of interests. At the New York Public Library, he's actually paid for documents, in particular the Thomas Addis Emmet collection of historical documents relating in particular to the Revolution and to the early years of the Republic, and then also literature. And so they decided, mainly because of copyright reasons, to keep it into the 19th century, because copyright causes real problems when you're dealing with literature. And then, even then, Mark Twain, who died in 1910, was not totally easy, because the University of California had renewed something. So they decided, therefore, that to do these 6 authors, Emerson, Hawthorne, Sophia Peabody Hawthorne, Thoreau, Whitman, and Twain. Problem for you as the user, though, is finding it. The New York Public Library is a huge institution. It's got a lot of thumbs and lots of pies. And so it's very difficult sometimes. I know I was talking to Beth earlier, and she was saying she found it very hard to find. If you do get up to the top line to do research, you will find that there is a place called Manuscripts and Archives. And this is probably the simplest place to start. But again, even then, you've got to follow certain sort of guidelines, certain obvious sort of, no, not obvious, certain very unobvious procedures to try and find things. Emerson, you'd think fairly obvious. No, you're going to have 6 pages of Emerson's. Any collection that has one thing by Emerson or by any person called Emerson is going to crop up. So yes, you then have to search through those to get down to Ralph Waldo Emerson. You then get an overall thing that shows you what you're going through. Once you get to Ralph Waldo Emerson's collection of papers at the detailed level, then you've also got these little symbols at the side to tell you that there is a digital thing there. So here we have address delivered at the dedication of the Art Museum in Boston. This is the second item down. We can then highlight that. It shows us what it's going to look like, and so on. Similarly, immortality here, an essay. If we want to look at the drafts for this, we can then click on that, and it takes us to these drafts. And you can see a creative process that no printed book is ever going to show you, that no printed version. Here you can see how the writer is looking at the writing process, how he's moving on. You can have pages that come upside down. You rotate those, and they come back up, and so on. So you have all these things. Thank you. And then you can have all these tools that enable you to zoom, and so on. You zoom, and you get up to a very good level of clarity. However, this is one of the photographs, this here, A Child's Reminiscence, is an early draft of Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking. And this was photographed 10 years ago. Now, this is not as good quality as it should be. We're having the problem that what we did at the beginning of the project is no longer good enough quality for the end of these things. If you look at this one that's more recent, it's a lot clearer. This is the ox tamer. Finally, I'm going to go very quickly. Some points that are very important. How do we find things? One of the things that we do need is sites and people who give us lists, who aggregate, who inform us about these things, whether through blogs, whether through websites, whether through the press. But even here, digitized medieval manuscripts, the University of California cannot afford, does not have the people to keep this up. For some reason, it's something that is not being done enough. And then we go through these things that sometimes it's very difficult to find things because they are not transcribed. One of the things that the New York Public Library is transcribing is menus. These are something that excite a lot of interest, and so you can go, and this is an online thing. You, as a member of the public, can go and help to transcribe these menus and so on, and you can go and just do one item if that's what you want to, so that these will then become findable online. We're also doing that with buildings. You can check on the maps and so on. You can come and sort of show us the numbers of the houses and so on. The Smithsonian is going one stage further. They are doing manuscripts. They're doing real manuscripts. And hopefully the technology that they are developing presumably with government money, are going to make available, or we're going to be able to at least use some of this technology in other places later on. However, finally, one of the things that I think is most important about digital archives is that things that you would never ask for if you're in a collection, certainly like the Berg collection, you would stick with what you're researching. You're not going to ask for these things. But here is a consul certificate written by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's absolutely wonderful to remember that this is what he was spending half of his time doing during the 1850s, was actually just doing forms and so on, and here you have his signature, and he's dealing with this consular business. Here you have a little poem written by Louisa May Alcott. It's been published once in a Concord journal to thank Nathaniel Hawthorne for a birthday present. And then finally, you have these weird little things that are found in corners. Sophia Peabody was the great-great-niece, in fact, of Abigail Adams. And so here we have a letter from Abigail Adams' sister, Mary Smith, to her sister-in-law, Mary Cranch Palmer, who was married to General Joseph Palmer. And so here we have, again, this byway that you would, if you were going to go and look for something about Abigail Adams or this family, you'd go to the Massachusetts Historical Society. But surprisingly, you will find these little sort of gems tucked away. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy, carry on.
And what Neil was, many of the themes Neil brought up are ones that I'm going to talk about as I share some examples of the promise and the problems and the payoff of digital collections hosted at the Massachusetts Historical Society's website. And I think, your point that there can be this reunion of collections online is a really wonderful one, but it kind of comes back to these collections of selection and presentation, and then how you make them discoverable, and then can you discover the content of many institutions in one way. So these are just constant challenges for all of us. In terms of the Massachusetts Historical Society, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's in my neighborhood. The Historical Society is located around the corner on Boylston Street. It's been around for a long time. It's had several different locations. It was established in 1791 to collect, preserve, and communicate materials relating to the history of the then new nation. And we're approaching the 225th anniversary, which will happen in 2016. And I think it's pretty remarkable that the mission is essentially the same in terms of collecting, preserving, and making accessible manuscripts, books, pamphlets, maps, things like that. We have been presenting content online for about 12 years. And each digital collection requires planning focused on content, production, and delivery, and it's a real balancing act. As we plan digital projects, we have to think hard about which content to select and how much of it. We have to specify which digital production methods and standards to use, and we have to make sure that we have the web delivery tools in place that will then achieve the results that we envision. We are very much dependent on larger grant money for larger projects, but smaller presentations are ones that we can take on as part of our ongoing operating expenses and budget. And I wanted to show you several examples. And here is kind of a little case study of the promise and potential, where we have one selected item. And this is a letter from Wilder Dwight to Helen Carey, written on September 5th, 1862. And this is what we prefer to do if we have the resources to do that, in terms of present something, have a description of it. This is a condolence letter. Wilder Dwight was a lieutenant colonel. He served in a regiment with Captain Richard Carey, who unfortunately died at the Battle of Cedar Mountain in Culpeper, Virginia. And in this letter, Wilder Dwight is writing his condolences to Mrs. Carey. And again, whenever possible, we like to have high-quality images. There's some preset zoom levels. You can rotate. You can really see the handwriting. And we like to present transcriptions as well. But this is very labor-intensive. But for us, it really is wonderful to make these things available. We want people from all over who have web access to be able to really get a sense of this letter. If we were on a live website, I'd scroll down so you could see this wonderful quote from Dwight saying, "Our memories of him are all that remain to us now. Mine are all bright and happy, and I find it impossible to realize that they are ended." And then Mrs. Carey annotates the letter. So the very end of the letter has a shift in handwriting, and she writes that Dwight died on the 19th of September from wounds received in the Battle of Antietam, just 5 weeks and 5 days after Richard. So you really have this little snapshot of history, this letter, and these two people writing on this letter. In terms of problems or challenges associated with digitization, one big one is limited resources and budgets, particularly budgets that are smaller than your ideal budget, prompt some serious thinking about trade-offs and priorities. And my institution had to grapple with these issues when we planned and implemented the digital collection presenting the diaries of John Quincy Adams. We are fortunate to be the home base of the Adams family papers. It's probably the most important manuscript collection in the Massachusetts Historical Society. It's just an amazing, comprehensive set of materials. It spans the years 1639 to 1889, consists of the official records and writings of 3 generations of Adamses, John and Abigail Adams, John Quincy Adams and Charles Francis Adams and their siblings. The Massachusetts Historical Society is also the home base to the Adams Papers documentary editing project. So our website has several pages that help people figure out all of the different Adams resources we have, because we want people to get to the content. And in terms of the diaries of John Quincy Adams, we really think of this as a digital collection where the focus is on this rich source. It's considered to be a national treasure. We actually got funding from a Save America's Treasures grant to both preserve the volumes and present access online. John Quincy Adams assembled 51 diary volumes containing 14,000 diary pages over the course of his life. He started keeping a diary in 1779 when he was 12 years old, and he continued until shortly before his death in 1848, and he had a very active career, so there's really a lot in the diary. The diaries, he kept several diaries at the same time, so there are different types of entries in different volumes. So for example, if you think about the day when he was sworn in as president, March 4th, 1825, there's a long diary entry in Diary 33, and it goes into a long description of the procession that he was involved with, going to the Capitol, getting sworn in, going to a ball in the evening, a passage about how his wife was feeling ill, people that he met with, very long. There are 2 other diaries containing entries for the same date, and the larger screenshot in the background shows you a screenshot of his line-a-day diary. And basically, this diary contains a month's worth of entries on 1 page. So he succinctly summarizes what happened on March 4th as, "I took the oath at the Capitol as President of the United States at Mr. Monroe's ball at evening." And historians feel that he was sort of using this line-a-day diary as a type of index, so he could get back to the other passages. And then he also kept a series of rubbish volumes, and the smaller screenshot is an example of that, where he has drafts or lists. And so again, here's another entry from March 4th, 1825. So now that you know a little bit about the diaries, when I explain a little bit about how we had to decide on trade-offs and priorities when we were approaching the digitization of this collection, I think you'll appreciate the fact that one key piece was to present all the diaries, all 14,000 pages. The trade-off was that we really couldn't have a fundable project if we wanted to tackle the transcriptions. There are transcriptions of portions of the diary, so that's worth knowing about. If you're a researcher, you'd have to grapple with the fact some materials are transcribed, some aren't. The left side of this slide shows you a page from a published edition done in the 1870s. Charles Francis Adams, John Quincy Adams's son, was the editor of a 12-volume work of John Quincy Adams's memoirs. Most biographers feel that even though it's comprised of 12 volumes, it represents about 50% or maybe 60% of what's in the diary. So that is a good source, but it's not complete. And then on the right side of this image, you have this wonderful authoritative transcription. The Adams Papers editors published and transcribed the earliest 13 diaries of John Quincy Adams, spanning the date 1779 to 1788. So if you're interested in his early life, this is an essential source where you have authoritative transcriptions, annotations, there's an index. The website comes in handy if you're really trying to look at the whole scope of his life. And so the website does let you browse by volume and also search by date. And the date search is a big tool on the website. And our digital team spent a lot of time looking at every single page and encoding all the dates. And those are the ones that get indexed in our search tool. There are over 50,000 dates on the pages in terms of the scope of his collection. We recognize that to search for a date, you have to know a date. And so another thing we built into the grant was a timeline, which will hopefully let some researchers zero in on which diaries or dates to use. So again, here we have an example of a collection that we really wanted to feature, essential, but we had to come up with a manageable project to make it doable and achievable with our budget and in our time. Another example of the problems associated with digital resources is the fact that a couple years ago, we migrated to a different web server, and our web developer had to put in some time to rebuild the search tool. Since we create all of our digital components based on standards, it was some work on his part, but it wasn't impossible. There was a lot of predictable data, and he could recraft the search tool fairly easily. One more collection I want to talk about in terms of conveying this idea of the promise, the problems, and the payoffs of digitized content is a set of Revolutionary era newspapers kept by a man with a very quirky name. And his name was Harbottle Door. He was a shopkeeper in Boston. He was a minor figure, and that's one reason that makes this collection so significant. He did serve every now and then as a selectman. He was a member of the Sons of Liberty. And beginning in 1765, he spent more than a dozen years collecting newspapers. He purchased them, he annotated them, he indexed them, he assembled them into volumes. He was very conscious of what he was doing. He created introductions to these volumes. And this is a screenshot showing you the introduction to Volume 2, and he talks about how I have thought it worthwhile to collect them, the newspapers, although at considerable expense and very great trouble, in hope that in the future they may be of some service towards forming a political history of the country. So he was consciously collecting them. The newspapers were annotated in several different ways by Dorr. Here's an issue from April 1765. It has the text of the Stamp Act. The middle column shows 3 reference marks, and this gives me a chance to quickly convey the types of annotations he made to his newspaper. So you see there's a parallels, there's a check mark, there's an asterisk, and if you look at the context of the asterisk, it's in the sentence relating to a letter written by an eminent merchant in London. And what he does sometimes is to identify either these anonymous people or people who publish under pseudonyms. So that's one thing that you'll see in the margins. Dennis de Bert is that eminent merchant. And then the parallels relate to one of the gems within the collection where he's sharing his opinion about the Stamp Act resolves and how this act was very voluminous and tended to enslave the Americans. And then that other type of reference mark, that check mark, referred to, it's basically a cross-reference. So V is Latin for C. See the repeal on page 411. He's creating a link. We did the same thing in a way because we have a jump to option within our website. You can jump to the page, you get to the page, and it has the repeal of the Stamp Act. So we wanted to really make it possible for people to interact with the collection the way Dorr had created it. And that's one reason why letting people browse by the volumes or by the newspaper titles or dates was so important, as was the fact we wanted to present a transcription of the index. And within the transcription of the index, we were able to add links to the pages that have the articles indexed under the terms he chose. And the index terms end up feeding our search tool for this site. As we look ahead, we really like this idea of crowdsourcing, and Neil was showing you some great examples from the New York Public Library site. We think we're going to head in the direction of asking users to add tags about names and topics and advertisements, and we have a way to display them in our interface. Up in the masthead, there's a About This Page link that will pop up a box, and if we have terms, for example, this particular page has something relating to Dr. Joseph Warren, something relating to an eclipse, and also water quality. So these would be more discovery terms. And it's really exciting to think about engaging with the audience, having an opportunity for them to increase the discoverability of this collection that we wanted to make available to people. And in terms of the payoff, I think the crowdsourcing, the engagement piece of it is tempting as one of the key aspects of payoff, but also knowing that people are using the collections is very satisfying. Last week through our Twitter feed, we got some great tweets from Keith Grant, and he is a PhD student at the University of New Brunswick. He's teaching a course about the pre-revolutionary time period, and he created an assignment where students were studying newspaper advertisements from our Dorr web collection. And the woman that manages our Twitter account sent a tweet back, and he gave us one more gem. And the one at the very bottom is Keith's quoting one of his students. And one student said, "You mean that we don't need special access to that collection? I love reading primary sources." So that's the payoff, the fact that these are available to everybody. They're students in Canada that love some of our primary sources. It's very satisfying. This is a very rich environment. It's just, it's an active one too, and it's a little bit of a moving target, so we all stay very busy. But I do think the fact that there's an emphasis on engaging with users is very important these days. And I know that as we were preparing for the panel, it was really interesting to hear from Sherry about how she hears back from users of the Mary Baker Eddy Library materials. And that's like wonderful that you already get feedback and have that dialogue and interaction.
That's right. I mean, our project is so new, so I really should start with a thank you to digital projects that have gone before us. I mean, particularly the folks at the Massachusetts Historical Society, that they have been so kind to us as we put our pilot project together. And I like the word promise, because I'm hoping that's what the pilot represents, is that it sort of illustrates what's possible. Because Mary Baker Eddy's papers, we're talking 28,000 documents, the letters, the manuscripts, drafts of her published writings, and but our pilot is just, could fit on the head of a pin by comparison. But hopefully it proves the concept that to show what is possible. And people have been looking at scans of the original documents, and they've been looking at transcriptions in the research room. But what we're offering now is an answer to the number one question we've gotten, which is, how can I access this from home? So that's, I think, the first way we're engaging with our audience is we're hopefully finally saying, well, yes, you can. So I'm going to walk you through what the project looks like and address a few of these issues, the problems and the payoff. And hopefully you'll agree by the end that the promise is there. So our main screen here, and if you look at the bottom, you see a click here to send comments and suggestions. And that's really been just the first way that we've started to hear from our users. We only launched in January, so we haven't been around very long. But it's been really nice that people already are starting to engage, and either they're finding transcription errors, or they have suggestions of maybe a document is actually related to another document, and so it's been really helpful. Or if frankly, if they'll find a typo, I'm thrilled if they'll take the time to send that to me, and I can make the correction. And so we selected the sermons as sort of our first effort, and we did it for a couple of reasons. One, we thought it really spoke to the library's broad audience. That on the one hand, we have this wonderful core of church members, but we also have, as the papers have become available, a very interested public and an interested group of scholars who want to make use of these papers. And so we're trying to find a way to speak to this diverse audience and make the papers useful for everyone. And I think in some ways it was where we started to encounter maybe our first problem. So while the sermons were a wonderful choice in many ways, as I'll show you in slides a little bit later, they were kind of a complex choice. We sort of picked our hardest documents right off the top, which I guess that was good. Some days I thought it was not a very good idea, but the transcriptions were very difficult. The documents are heavily edited. They're very long. They're very dense, and so they sort of brought their own problems. And many of them were not identified within the collection itself. And so that was sort of my first job, was just figuring out what is a sermon. And we had, but I think there's great payoff in that. I feel like, we're getting to know our collection a lot better by really spending a lot of time with it. And so a lot of documents that had never been identified as anything other than a miscellaneous article, I can now say with confidence, actually that was a sermon. I can give you the date, I can tell you the place. And I even have this other document that's related to it. So you come in, this is the first search screen here, title, date, the unique identifying number, the accession number, the type. And even here we were already starting to think about our audience a bit, and the fact that we're using an editorial title, which is something that we are assigning to each document. And there is a way, or sometimes, Eddy has used titles in the sermons themselves, and we can just use that, but not everything has a title. But we just were trying to think, I think as Neil brought up, is sort of, how you need to give people an access point, and just saying, pick your unique identifying number wasn't very helpful. But if we can give you a title, then you're starting to get a sense of subject, and, you can say, oh, that's a Bible verse, that I'm interested in. And so we're going to look at this sermon, Children, Have Ye Any Meat? And just to point out, this is kind of an interesting and, again, sort of complex one, because she didn't address this topic just one time, but we know of at least 3 different sermons where she preached on that Bible verse. And so sometimes it presented a challenge of knowing, which document goes with which date. And in some cases, we're not totally sure, and we're happy to say that When we think that, Mrs. Eddy was, she was very smart, that if she had a file on one thing, she certainly wouldn't hesitate to revisit that file the next time she's going to preach on that topic. So if we go in here, this is the screen that you come to, and I'll just give you a quick overview of the screen before we go into the details of it. And everything is on one screen, which was new for us, to be able to have the transcription, to be able to have the scan of the original right on the same page, to have related images on the same page, and to have, most importantly for this project, is annotation, is to start to give people some way markers as they are exploring the collection. I think at first when I was saying annotation, I should have learned pretty quickly that people were like, yeah, whatever that means. And I would get sort of a nice, like, that's nice, dear. But so finally it's like, these are the footnotes. This is that explanation you want, that historical context, that background, just to give you a little bit of information as you're making your way through the documents. So this page for me really starts to stitch our collection together. So instead of siloing our different collections where letters always live here, historic photographs live over here, maybe maps or even a totally different department, that we're starting to bring them together in a way that tells an actual story. So for example, just by offering the people who were involved in making this document. And in our project, any time you see something in teal, that's your signal that you can click on it and get more information. So for example, you can click on Mary Baker Eddy, you just jump down the page again, a little bit, you'll get a photograph of her and a brief bio. And we try to do that wherever possible. So you can just stay right on the page, though. You don't have to go to a different place to be able to get this information. And it can be really helpful for minor players. For example, if she's just writing, dear student, we can tell you who the student was. And if we're imagining sort of a global audience, even the major players need some biographical detail. So, people who are totally new to the subject, can feel like they're starting off, it's not totally fresh. They can get a little bit of content right away. So here, just to talk more about the metadata that's offered at the top, you can click on these little plus signs that you see right here, and you open those up, and you can get just a little more information about either a description of the document, or in this case, an editorial note that tells you where the sermon was given. And we can click on, again, Chickering Hall is in teal, so that tells us that we can get more content about it. So we can get a photo, as well as just a little description of what it was like, the address that was on Tremont Street here. And you can also see that there's related versions, for example, that we're trying to bring the collection together, that if we know that there's a related document, we want to give you an easy way to get to it. And we're also, if there's even a related topic, that for some of them they're drafts of the same thing, but for other things, they just might be on the same topic. Like she might mention, this same sermon in a letter, for example. But I'm going to show you one that's just a related, we're going to go to this A10642B, which happens to be a draft of the benediction she gave at the end of this sermon. And it just opens in a new tab, so you can toggle back and forth. You don't lose where you were. You can easily go back and forth between that sermon and this benediction. And just to show you on that same document, the Christian Science Journal was in teal. One of the things we've done in these, what they call the gazetteers, we have like a glossary of terms. Since there's a lot of terminology in Christian Science, a lot of abbreviations get used in these documents, we wanted to have a place where we could just sort of keep a running list. And titles like this, for example, so you could know, when the magazine started and so forth, just to give you just a snapshot of information right while you're in the moment. And the idea is that then if users want something more in depth, then they can go and do that research. But at least, right on the page, they can get something so they can keep going. Just to talk about then the kind of annotation that happens within the text of the document itself, one thing that became really important as I was talking about this project early on is the difference between annotation, so that context, that historical information that we want to give, and how that's different from interpretation. I think particularly with a religious figure like Eddy, there was some concern that we were going to be somehow interpreting the documents for people. And we don't have any interest in doing that at all. We want to make the documents accessible, and so then people can come to their own conclusions about the content that they contain. But some of the annotation that we are doing is Bible verses that we were able to encode the Bible verses that often she is making allusions to the Bible. I mean, frankly, her sermons are one after another. She was so steeped in the Bible, and obviously her audience was too, that she can make these references, and people then were apparently really comfortable with it. But today, we thought it would be really helpful if you could just have access to the King James right on the page. And so all you have to do is click, and the verse will pop up. The other kinds of annotation that we're putting on the inside is like a note from the archivist about the handwriting. So we can do handwriting changes. This one's making the point that you may want to go see the original because what you're seeing now is written on a lightly erased hand. So the documents themselves can get very complex, but we can make note about that for the user. We also are taking misspellings, and we're correcting them so that you can find them in a keyword search, but we still want to give people access to how it was originally spelled. And so you can just see it in a pop-up, as written. We're doing the same thing with expansions of abbreviated words so that you can get the full word. So I'm going to move to that related document, that benediction that goes with the sermon. Again, you can see the Bible verse and general footnotes too. Had there just been an unusual term or something like that, we would have defined it. Or had there been an event that just needed a little bit more historical context, we would give those as well. But what I want to talk about next is that original scan. And so you can click on that and you can open it. It gets larger right on the same page. And then it allows you can click through the individual pages of the scan. And I'm going to bring it up just so you can see what the transcription looks like. So now I'm going to divide the room, and I'm going to test you on your ability to transcribe. No, I just wanted you to see that how complex it can be, that you have a lot of cross-outs, insertions, things are moving around the page, and it sometimes can make it very difficult. In the end, what is a transcription? How do you honor this document? And that's one of the reasons we really like having the original, is that no matter how hard we try in a transcription, it's always good to be able to look at the original thing. And as Neil pointed out, you can see them digitally in many ways better than you can see the actual thing. I mean, obviously, we're preserving the original by only showing you, an electronic version of it. No one's handling it. It's not seeing the light of day. Et cetera. But I think in many ways, these are almost easier to read. You can manipulate them more. I think putting the light behind it with the screen, which is something you would never do to an original, I think really helps as well. So everybody got that? You've read that one and committed it to memory? Good. Okay, good job. All right. So one of the things that we really thought about, and again, thinking about our audience, is how we wanted to present those transcriptions, because we knew we were dealing with often heavily edited manuscripts but we knew that we had individuals that were going to want to read for meaning. You know, church members in particular, they're wanting to get some metaphysical meaning from these things, but it can be hard to do when you're stuck with so many deletions and insertions, and it's really hard to follow the actual line of thought in the document. And I had seen a variation done by the Newton Project, and where they use a normalized versus a diplomatic view of some journals. And we were able to sort of use a version of that for our transcription. So the default is what we call the final edits. It's our best effort at what we think is Eddy's sort of final product. And if you take out the deleted words, you insert all the inserted words, and you can do that silently, we come up with what we call our final edits. But at the same time, though, we know that scholars could really be interested in what are the things that she took out, what it was her editing process. And so you also have this original option. And so there you're seeing what's a more literal transcription, where things have been, you see the deletions, you see the insertions, and so forth. And again, but you always have that original to go back to. And the really great part about working digitally with XML is this is actually the same transcription, and it's just about whether you are suppressing the code or employing the code. And so it's great. It's where I think it looks, like it's really hard, like, oh, they made 2 transcriptions. No, we didn't. It's just about what code we're employing or suppressing. And so it's really about now that the payoff, that I think for me, the collection comes together. We stitch together all these different pieces to tell a much more cohesive story. I think that we can offer annotation that's helpful without being intrusive, that we're trying to do it in a way that, click it if you want it, don't click it if you don't. And we're trying to make it succinct enough that it's not overpowering the documents themselves, which is obviously, the most important things. And I can say just from working on it that it gives us a better understanding of Mary Baker Eddy herself. I think particularly as a preacher, it's sort of been an understudied aspect of her life, and something that I think that we don't think about that much, but it was so interesting to learn more about that side of her, and to really get a sense of how did she command an audience. And like that sermon that I brought up, you see she starts out, basically let me set the scene, and she does this beautiful job of, showing that scene between when Jesus comes back and finds the disciples having returned to fishing, and it just was an interesting window to me on how she would command an audience, how she would work her way through the Bible, which obviously her command of the Bible is just incredible. I think that was the one thing that we could really see through all of this, is that it almost just flowed from her in a stream of consciousness sort of way, and that was sort of very exciting to see. And I think the best payoff at all is users all over the world can access this, right from their own homes.
Well, now it's your turn to ask questions. Just come up to the mic. I was struck by sort of the Renaissance aspect of our 3 panelists. What you see is they all have subject knowledge. They all have a knowledge of the editorial process and questions, and they all have the technology within their grasp, which is far more than anyone even dreamed of having 20 years ago. It's really amazing to see what they bring to the job and then what they're able to create at the end. It's just as someone who's used archives, these are dream archives. They're not not just plain old wonderful archives. They're just super.
May I make a
Yeah.
comment on that? I'm a librarian and an archivist, and my first 2 professional positions were really working with collections. And I kind of feel like all the work I did on appraisal and on creating finding aids and doing cataloging and description, it really ties right in with the digital, because you need a lot of appraisal, you need a lot of metadata. So there's a lot of logical connections between sort of traditional archival and editorial, but you know, those kind of activities and this kind of digital presentation of the content.
How many of you have used digital archives? Okay. What's your favorite? Anybody? Come on. Shout out a favorite. The
Yeah.
Getty? Yes. What? Pardon me?
Do you,
Okay.
do you do some crowdsourcing? Do you do some transcriptions? Yeah. So Trove is a big effort. It's the National Archives of Australia, and they're presenting thousands of newspapers, and they have OCR, optical character recognition, of the newspaper articles, and they present it in such a way that they want the users to correct them. And it's a very popular site. It's a wonderful site.
Any more favorites? Pardon me? The British Library. Yes, they have lots of different things you can find. One of my favorites is the Blake Archive. I don't know if any of you have used that, but that's a point that that Neil made. The copies of Blake's books are all over the world. And for a scholar to compare different printings of a single edition would require a huge travel budget. But what they've done is to bring all those editions together in one place and allow you to do something that you couldn't do even if you had that travel budget, which is to have pages facing each other from this printing and that printing. They've actually indexed the images so that if you want to find all the bunny rabbits, for example, or angels, I like bunny rabbits better, you can find them in the images, which, again, think about how difficult that is to do and how much work goes into creating that ability for the users. Yes? You want to come up?
Thank you very much. Question, I wonder if you have any thoughts about institutions using digitization as a way of preserving the knowledge of archivists. Because, I mean, let's say you may have an Adams, somebody who hasn't necessarily written books on Adams, but who may have a tremendous knowledge of the collection, let's say, for example, and who may be close to retirement age or something. Digitization as a tool for capturing that individual's knowledge.
How about the slip file?
That's a great example.
Yeah.
So I think you can digitize and collect all sorts of collections. So it could come down to really how do your resources allow you to tackle different projects. And what Beth was mentioning is this amazing index to all known Adams documents. And the Adams papers based their methodology on what the Jefferson papers was doing. And they would create slips, color-coded, to indicate whether it was in a collection on-site or off-site, or whether it was just a mention of a document. So it's really this process of finding out where all the documents are, what they are, and it helped them organize and prioritize and make selections for the volumes. So in a sense, that's
Well, and someone
fulfilling.
kindly gave the Adams Project money to digitize this tool, which before was sitting in drawers in the office. And in addition to the information you'd expect on the slip, various editors, as time went by, would write notes on them, like, this is not in John's hand, or this, this date is incorrect. All of that information is now available online to anyone who wants to use it. But it was a, 2-year,
Two or 2.5 year.
2.5 year,
Right.
many thousand, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars effort to do that. And it brings together 50 years of work.
And so that's available
Yeah.
on the Massachusetts Historical
Yeah.
Society's website. It's Oak Online Adams Collections. It's a searchable database.
Hi, I work for a small theological school, and we have some interesting things in our special collections, but we don't have the staff or the technology to digitize them ourselves. And I'm wondering, you were talking about projects where things were brought together from different places. Is there a place to go to find out if people are starting those kinds of projects and maybe looking for materials from other institutions?
As far as I know, no. But the thing is that these things always depend upon the initiative of one person. So you can become that person, or somebody can become that person. And that's very important, because if we can create clearinghouses or centers for this kind of thing, then I think this is the kind of thing that will move forward. One thing I was saying, that most of the stuff that I was showing you at the beginning of my presentation, it was not the library's initiative to photograph and to get these documents photographed. It was the initiative of the people who wanted them, who wanted all the Dunn manuscripts, who wanted all the Blake manuscripts, who wanted all the Virginia Woolf or whatever. They approached, they paid for the digitization. Now, from the point of view of the New York Public Library, we have a special digital unit over in Queens, where everything is sort of taken over and photographed there and so on. And this has to be done. It's very expensive. It takes time. And although it's an in-house thing, it needs money and so on. Obviously, if you don't have that, then you need to sort of see which libraries would be able to give you time and so on, which libraries would be able to do that. And so the thing would be to approach possibly somewhere like the New York Public Library or whatever is the closest university library that is doing digitization, and to see what they can do or what they would recommend, and to try and make these connections. But if you're the person with the initiative, if you're the person with that desire to do it, you're the ideal person to sort of start creating this network, because it is, I think, it's one of these things that we were saying about the importance of community, but we also need the importance of initiators and centers and so on, people who coordinate. And so you've got this sort of this interesting sort of tension, or not tension, but creative synergy between the people who initiate, the people who coordinate, the people who are sort of bringing things together, and then the people who are the community, people who are engaged, people who are actually doing their little bit or showing their interest and so on. So from that point of view, I'm sorry I can't be more helpful, but maybe...
Is your institution located in Massachusetts?
It is, yeah.
Because there is a statewide initiative called Digital Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and its partner is the Boston Public Library, and they have this wonderful program under the Library for the Commonwealth. And so if your institution is willing to really make its collections available through a statewide portal, then you could be eligible to have some digitization services from the Boston Public Library. And membership in the Digital Commonwealth is really strongly encouraged, because it's this overall collaboration that tries to pull together all types of institutions that want to make historical or cultural materials available online. So digitalcommonwealth.org.
Okay. All right.
So
Thank you.
that
Thank you
might be a
both.
good
Thanks.
route for some materials.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Hello. Just a question for you about crowdsourcing. I'm trying to imagine, when I think of crowdsourcing, I think of something like something my kids might like, Rap Genius or something like that. And so I'm just trying to imagine it in in the world of like the Papers project that Sherry was talking about, or the Adams Papers, or something that the New York Public Library would undertake. I don't know if any of you want to comment on the usefulness of that, or even the mechanics of doing something like that, or just even if you're only imagining it at this point.
Just very, very quickly, I think that one of the things is one needs a very robust structure, a technical architecture. A lot of people will log on, start doing something, and decide that they don't like doing it, or whatever, or just get halfway, not do very good jobs, and so on. So you do need to have a very, very good structure. You need to have built-in checks. I was told that, for instance, in the Smithsonian transcription project, one, they require a bit of training, and two, they, I think, have the same document transcribed at least 2 or 3 times, if not more, so that they are cross-checking there. And certainly some people have said that the amount of checking, the amount of cross-referencing almost takes up as much time as the actual time saved by having the work done. However, it engages people. It actually gets people to invest. And I think that's an important thing, and that's something that I think that you were mentioning earlier on, Sherry, when we were talking before this.
Well, I tried to get you all invested in doing one of my transcriptions, so yeah, that'd be great. And I think it is from that investment perspective, because transcription work is really hard, and I think in some ways it's almost more art than science. There are some people who are really good at it, and the vast majority of us are not. But if you can, it sort of gives you a way to sort of find those even few people who are good at it. But at the same time, it gets a lot of other people interested, and I think, so yeah, I'm ready to sign you all up for that.
You can also use crowdsourcing for annotation to identify people who may be, are outside. For example, if your subject travels around the country, chances are your own reference materials aren't that good. You can find people who lived in the Boston area, but if your person travels to Illinois, your library doesn't have those biographical references. You don't have the resources. Somebody in Illinois, I know that person, lived next door to my grandmother. So you can, and that's another way of engaging people. This is a mystery. Can you help us solve it? I don't know how well that works, but we get desperate sometimes. There's a person you simply cannot identify, and someone else can do it. And it's like transcription. You can have a word that you've been staring at for a week, and you cannot figure out what it is. And the person in the office across the hall comes over and looks and says, "Oh, I know what that is." Yeah. So the more eyes, the better. More questions? Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm just curious. When you bring something to light, an element of your collection, you illuminate through a digital project an element of your collection, how important is it then also to make your public aware of what you haven't been able to put up? What's not there that could be there? So that there's awareness of what the parameter is of what you've made available, so that they have a sense of what that larger landscape is, even though it's still in the shadows.
Sadly, I don't think we're very good at actually informing people what we have done positively, let alone what we haven't done negatively. And for instance, if you're trying to find information about the Polonsky project at the New York Public Library, you really do have to search. It's not being screamed about from the rooftops. But you're right that it's something that we should think more about, putting in context. What isn't available and what isn't there. At the moment, that is not really a factor. I think we are very much sort of thinking about the future and trying to move forward and trying to think about what we will be doing. But you're right, there is a lot of stuff that isn't there, and as yet it's something that I don't think that we've addressed fully. It's something that really only very few people actually know about, and this goes back to the question that was asked earlier about tapping the archivist's knowledge. It's the archivists who actually know what the archive contains fully, and they're the ones who are aware actually of how little, or what fraction of the total collection we've actually been able to sort of put online.
I like your question. I think it's very important for us to consider. I know I thought of sort of two different points to make. They don't really answer your question, but one is that I know at the Massachusetts Historical Society, we've been very conscious to have good introductory information within all our digital presentations. But as we do some informal usability tests, we find that people don't read it that thoroughly. So we try to explain what we're presenting, what the confines are of it, and we can often put it in the context of other collections. Our John Quincy Adams Diaries online site has a fairly lengthy page sort of explaining what's been published, what's available, in case people do want to track down transcriptions. So I think we could do more, but we do try to do some. And then the other point I just wanted to briefly mention was that just in general, I think archivists have been really trying to figure out ways to make collections more and more discoverable. But it's very challenging because you can have, detailed finding aids for some collections and yet just either no inventory list or a rough inventory list for others. And it's kind of a struggle to try to make things as discoverable as possible within your own catalogs and tools and then within this wider world of either shared cataloging and or just the web.
Yeah, I think one way that I think we've had to look at this is, since we're putting sort of one person's life up in installments, the way they feel about something at the beginning of their career, they might feel very different about it at the end. And so just sort of seeing that, a person's life and then the papers themselves can have a trajectory. And so if you're only showing a sample of that, people might think, wow, she was really so invested in that and she was all about that thing. But you might know, that actually passes out after a few years and she becomes very invested in this other thing. So I think that's just the way I've had to be mindful about that and thinking about making sure people understand that these are the documents from a particular subset of her life, but they aren't from the whole of her life. And so, obviously you just need to keep filling in those pieces of the puzzle so people can have the complete picture.
As a researcher, to me, if an archivist can't digitize anything but one thing, what I want is the finding aids. I want to know what you have. And if your finding aid tells me which stuff is online, that's very helpful. But I really want to know what's there. And, that we kind of, in the glamour of digitizing, we might neglect the task of improving those finding aids and developing finding aids for collections that we've kind of put off to the side. But for researchers, that's really the critical issue. What is in that building? Anyone else? Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks to our panel. You can go home. You can find that document online. Sherry has organized a quiz, and they're offering prizes for the best transcription. No, I made that up. But thank you all for coming.